Yeah, thanks for coming in and supporting the Sonora Glass School. Just want to let you guys know we are a 501c3 nonprofit, so we kind of get you in with a free demo today to ask you for money. So if you enjoy the demo and you have a good time, we have something available. We have a donation box for contributions. And if you're in a really good mood, you'd like to make more contributions, let one of the staff know we can talk with you one-on-one. My name is Brian Jacobson. I'm the manager of the flame shop here. Taught lawn office here over the last 10 years, but I came on in May as a flame shop director, revitalizing the program and everything. So to see this turn out for something other than a flame shop makes me really happy. So I want to thank each and every one of you for coming out. And with that, hell yeah! Dan Hoffman for coming out too from Santa Cruz. He did a 3-day workshop here. We collaborated today, and he has a little presentation prepared. And he's going to go ahead and do a really small micro demo. And then he's going to make it to be the center part of the goblet. So we have the camera set up here on this little teeny tiny torch, which you'll see momentarily, and that will be projected on the screen to kind of see what's going on. I'll pass the mic over here in a second. If anyone has any questions, just raise your hand. Feel free to ask questions throughout the process. And yeah, I hope you enjoy yourselves. And once again, thanks for coming out.
Yeah, thank you, Brian, again. It's glad to have me. I have a brief presentation about a little bit about who I am, how I got started blowing glass, some of my inspirations and journeys that have led me to creating the body of work I create now, which is all these micro pieces. And the class was titled Scientific Approaches to Artistic Flame Working. I really do my best to take scientific principles and apply them to artwork. So, without further ado, started blowing glass during my freshman year of studying chemistry at UC Santa Cruz. During my freshman year, I stumbled into a local intro glass blowing class with Nathan Bennett, who's on Instagram as Santa Cruz Glass Picks. I was instantly hooked and just fell in love with glass, knew it was what I wanted to keep doing. I did continue through my degree as well, and also fell in love with chemistry. Some of my early glass work was making really basic production swing pipes. Nathan was primarily a pipe maker at the time. I graduated on from an apprenticeship with him, making these really basic pipes, practicing fundamentals, being surrounded by more talented artists that were doing more complicated projects and just keeping me engaged. On the right side there, some of my later on early work, once I was starting to understand the medium, play with it a little bit more. I was really into trying to keep things consistent and even. I started exploring a bunch of different techniques with pendants. I really fell in love with dot enclosures, which is a technique involving making a bubble of glass, adding tiny dots to it and melting that in. Through that kind of work, I really fell in love with small detail and was practicing building a steadier and steadier hand. Here's some more work. This is probably from 2015, 2016 or so. It was 3 to 4 years into glass blowing. Was starting to really devote a lot of time to it, really put more effort into the quality of my pieces, trying other patterns, applying what I was doing with my little pendants to larger functional pieces like these small bombs or rigs. And then molecules happened. So, studying chemistry in Santa Cruz, I was pretty fascinated by psychedelia and psychedelic science, the study of various naturally occurring molecules and how they interact with the human brain and reality as we know it. The primary push towards that direction was the book People by Alexander Shulgin and his wife Anne Shulgin. He was a Bay Area-based chemist who was equally fascinated with the concept of these small molecular geometries and how one oxygen atom moving over on a molecule will differentiate it from dopamine, the happiness molecule we all know, to molecules like mescaline, MDMA, 2CB, other more psychoactive compounds. So this is, for example, a melatonin molecule, small pendant I made. So in June 2015, I made my first couple molecules. I was able to dig out a picture of them. It's an atropine molecule and a glucose molecule that I made for some of my chemistry professors. They're relatively crude compared to how they are now. They came together all right. I kind of was just taking a stab in the dark as far as the process with the glass to create these molecules. But I knew I was kind of onto something. and really decided to keep progressing. The initial spark to make them was doing my organic chemistry homework, playing with a little plastic molecule kit, and having this just sort of beautiful epiphany moment of realizing, wow, there's only really 2 or 3 shapes of these little atoms that combine into all of these different shapes that then become such drastically different compounds and different essences of reality as we know it. So as soon as I kind of dialed in my process to make these molecules, I knew I should scale them down because, of course, they're molecules. So over about 2 years, from 2015 to 2017, I just practiced making them smaller and smaller. First, just using the same tools, the same torch, the same glass I used on those first 2 big ones, except trying to make them a little bit smaller each time. Eventually stepping down. For example, this is a typical bench burner torch that we use. Most of us also have a small hand torch. Eventually I realized, what if I got a hand torch and did it on that? And then I realized, what if I got a smaller hand torch? What if I got a magnifying glass? So this is this exact illustration here when it was very fresh, smaller magnifying glass. I hadn't quite figured out this black backdrop yet, so I just had a variety of random dark things in the background. But exact same torch, exact same platform. And pretty quickly stumbled into making them at the kind of current size, which I guess now would be a good point to kind of pass around a few pieces. Be careful of them, but don't be super duper worried. They are a lot more sturdy than one might think. I'll start that one going around this way. That one's an accurate mescaline molecule inside a pendant. This one's a small Klein bottle. So I pretty quickly developed the kind of style of making these micromolecules. One of my chemistry teachers helped me out with getting into the Museum of Art History in Santa Cruz for a glow festival they did. I was in the chemistry room where there was a bunch of little luminary chemistry experience and things. I had a little cabinet that I built with, I think it was close to 20 little micromolecules, different sugars, different proteins, different psychedelics, different plant medicines. And I've also now just incorporated molecules as my main obsession and passion at all kinds of scales. This one's an MDMA molecule in process. That sculpture on the right is one of the larger solid sculptures I've done. It's a geometric form in the middle. It's kind of a fractal shape that's a 3-dimensional sequencing triangle. Around the edges of it is a DMT, mescaline, and psilocybin molecule, and on the very top is an LSD molecule. The bottom base part is sort of a 2-dimensional projection of the shape. So through developing this technique of making these little molecules, I started realizing I could scale things up and down, and as long as I kept all my fundamentals the same, the work would come out all right. Here's a few other pieces, incorporating the one on the left is a functional pipe that I made for the Champs Trade Shows last games, which is a nationwide circuit of flame-working pipe-making competitions. There will be another picture of that full piece later on. And the right was a demonstration piece I made at Las Vegas, which is another glass trade show. It's a teeny tiny LSD molecule in a very tiny goblet. The whole thing was maybe an inch tall. With the molecules, I also started realizing that I had this sort of universally applicable signature thing that a lot of other glass blowers were intrigued by. And almost anybody's style or focus or passions, there's a molecule that sort of matches it. Here's a couple random examples I pulled up. My first teacher and mentor, Nathan Bennett, made one of his sort of signature recycler pipes. He covered it in different terpenes found in cannabis. And a buddy of mine, Fetch Cone Glass, made this sort of tie-dye psychedelic looking flower, and we put a little LSD molecule under it. After finishing in Santa Cruz and getting my bachelor's in chemistry, I was so hooked on glass that I knew for sure I wanted to do that more than I wanted to end up in a lab working a job pipetting something over and over. So somebody told me about Salem Community College, which is a community college in New Jersey that teaches our country's only scientific flame working program. So it was a 2-year program I attended. I was struggling to find many pictures of the apparatus I made, but this is a Binrock, sorry, a soft flake extractor. be used for distillation of active ingredients and essential oils out of plant matter and other reactions. On the right is a good example of the bigger benefit I got out of the school. I already had a pretty good technical proficiency with glass when I went there, but the community in Salem was incredible. There's a couple hundred glass blowers of all different ages from all over the country and world that were all deeply passionate about this art form and this medium, enough to live in South Jersey for a couple of years. No offense to anybody from South Jersey. And so there, being surrounded by the community, I was able to push myself to try to go bigger with projects and try to really push my limits. So that was an action shot somebody took of me at a Christmas party for the school, putting together a giant hollow DMT molecule while I already laughed over my shoulder. Going to Salem also led to some cross-country meandering, having grown up and lived in California, but attending school in New Jersey with all of my stuff on my glass blowing gear. Ended up assembling this 98 Toyota Camry, towing a little pop-up camper all over the country. That led to a lot of really interesting collaboration sessions as my kind of social media presence was growing, and more artists in the pipe making scene and elsewhere became aware of my work and wanted to make some pieces with me. Did a little stop in work with Joe Peters in Colorado. We put together this piece around his signature honeycomb and bumblebee motifs that has a fructose and sucrose molecule, the two sugars found in honey. On the right is an artist, Josh Ford, in Portland, Oregon. Makes lots of scientific chemistry style artistic pieces, so our collaboration was natural. I put a little DMT molecule in this pendant. The smoke on the top has a little hole going through it, so it has a necklace. And I also started getting involved in pieces where I was kind of one of the driving forces to really try and make something special. So this one we made in Little Rock, Arkansas in 2017 with two of my friends, Whit Vardaman and Ryan, who does my Slink class. It's titled Natural Medicine, and it's a functional pipe that's also a sculpture of this sort of tree spirit. She's offering an oxytocin molecule in her hands, the love hormone, with the DMT molecule, the spirit molecule. Wow, that works way better, sorry about that. And in the base of her head, she's covered in little woodland critters and representations of different plant medicine, incorporating the active molecules of each. So there's a cluster of cacti with a mescaline molecule, some mushrooms with psilocybin, cannabis leaves around the THC molecule, and some little crystal clusters somewhere with a small lattice structure. So working on pieces like that really inspired me to realize I can kind of make some of these types of pieces that I had previously only looked up to and seen online and thought would be out of my grasp. One of those summers between between Salem and California, I took a 3-week class at Pilchuck with Wayne Stratman, who's known for his plasma work, and Cedric Ginnart and Karina Guavin. I want to give them a huge shout out. Cedric taught me a lot of my approaches that I then went on and taught the class here. So he's a scientific glass blower at the University of Montreal in Quebec, and his wife Karina makes these whimsical little fairy tale sculptures that collaborate on beautiful, large-scale chalices and orbs and all these pieces that incorporate scientific techniques with her artistic design. Some of those travels also led me to the Champs trade shows, which is a series of trade shows that take place across the country. They incorporate a glass games frameworking competition. This is the same piece incorporating an accurate DNA strand in the very center. And these picture angles turn into chaos, but it's a mandala made of 6 DMT molecules at the bottom and 3 more emerging out of it that hold the whole piece. Got 5th place overall with that one. And I also started getting some international attention to the molecules. I had some people on social media purchase the little THC pendant, took it to an event in Spain. Martin Birgel, the founder of Roar, which is one of the originating bomb companies worldwide, he took scientific glass principles from his training and in the early 80s developed some of the techniques that are now commonplace, using glass on glass fittings and other things like that. So I get an email one day from Martin@roar.de saying, hey, you should come to Germany sometime. We'd love to work with you. So made that trip happen in 2019. We put together a series of pieces, including this large beaker bong. For some reason, the pipe community calls this shape a beaker bong, even though it's a flask, with a THC molecule on the outside. During that trip, I also networked to go back later that year to the Cultiva Expo in Austria. Roar puts on a glass blowing demonstration there every year. They fly out 3 artists to the US, and we put on a whole 3-day demonstration at this big hemp expo. So I went out there, brought my original teacher Nathan Bennett and my friend Cameron Burns, 2 other Santa Cruz-based glass blowers, and we made a whole series of collaborations, including that crazy rainbow thing on the right, and some kind of more traditional pipe-shaped pieces on the left. After that trip, I had the opportunity to go visit Murano. I was put in touch with the Cortea and Alamin brothers, which are these 3 gentlemen. Their family has been blowing glass on islands since around the 1400s. So to just be able to let alone be invited and hang out and see them and also work with them. I had a small THC molecule left over from the Roar trip. So just like that, they assembled this whole beautiful Venetian-style goblet around it. That piece is now part of a collection that they're slowly building of collaborative goblets. They're some of the only glass blowers on the island I know of that have really embraced the global collaborative energy that's coming out of a lot of the rest of the world's glass blowing scenes. And they're also one of the few that work with borosilicate glass instead of soft glass. So I was really stoked to be able to do that. Another international event I started doing is the Highland Flames, which the hat represents. It's a small glass blowing festival, pipe making based and cannabis celebrating in Scotland. So my girlfriend was living in London for a little while in 2022. I went to go visit her, looked into some glass opportunities there. Was invited to come blow glass at the Highland Flames. They set up a whole series of torches, a lot of local UK artists and combined with American artists, also from other places in the EU. Very collaborative atmosphere and a beautiful natural place. So this event has had a big impact on my growth as an artist. Last summer I was able to display a few pieces, including this plasma sculpture made with Bruce Suba. He's a plasma and neon artist in Santa Cruz. MAPS is the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Science. So it's one of the nation's and probably the world's largest organizations that's trying to fundraise and raise awareness and information about the benefits of psychedelic science and some of these plant medicines. So to be able to display some work in a gallery there was pretty special. Got to meet a lot of really interesting researchers and shamans and practitioners, alongside a lot of other very interesting visionary artists. Just last year, I was able to go back to Venice again and was accepted to be part of the Venice Glass Week, which is an delocalized show for a whole week across Venice, all kinds of galleries host little shows. I had 4 pieces, including one of the ones that's right here right now. We're on display in a palazzo in the middle of the city. So that was a really surreal experience, getting to be out there for a couple of weeks, talking with all these traditional maestros and just seeing hundreds, if not thousands, of people file through this exhibit and ogle at my pieces. Coming back from Venice, I realized that my girlfriend and I supporting our beautiful dog Zuno down there in Santa Cruz, which is the highest rental market in the country. I kind of needed a little more stability. Things were picking up pretty good with the art careers, traveling around the world. It was getting a little too crazy with trying to be everywhere all at once, realizing that relying on my artistic pieces for my main income was creating a lot of mental health issues. So I picked up a job doing scientific glass blowing, making X-ray tubes at Hydro X-ray, which is based in Santa Cruz. I've been there now for a little over a year and a half, and starting next month, I'm going to be scaling back down to part-time to shift my focus back into the art. Feels like I've built some good stability and some good work ethic. So now moving on to some of the more recent pieces I've been really proud of and really honored to be a part of. Mr. Gray is the moniker of Scott Rosinski. He's one of the kind of pioneers of the cannabis pipe making scene. He's known for making these sculptural pieces with these sparkling dichroic glass cannabis leaves. He's based up in Humboldt County, good 5-6 hour drive from Santa Cruz. So for a couple of years, I was living out of a van. Would travel up there for 2 weeks, 2 months at a time, and chip away at this piece. It's a slightly larger than life bust of a skull, built completely around a very complicated recycler piece. There's 3 funnels kind of embedded in the neck here. This part right here loops up around, and you would put your stuff there. You would take out this third eye piece, and you smoke it from there. And it's covered in micromolecules as well, and inside the brain, which these pictures don't really show, I have a very large scale lattice in there. So it was really special because he said one of the most, if not the most complicated pieces he's ever made. He's been blowing glass since before I was born. So it's really cool to be able to travel around and kind of push artists even on that caliber out of their comfort level and see what happens. Some of my more recent functional pieces, I don't make a ton of pipes these days, between the job and life. These take at least a couple days to a week of really dedicated focus. So I've been more so passionate about my little micro work and doing occasional one-off pieces. Both of these pieces, this lattice structure in the bubble spins as you would smoke out of the piece. So that adds a whole other level of complexity to it. Which brings me to my lattices, kind of grew out of my molecule work. A lattice in chemistry and physics would be a network of repeated units. In crystallography, every kind of crystal substance has some kind of a lattice structure of how it builds out. My lattices I make, I'm not trying to model a specific mineral or a specific chemical or anything. Mine are just an appreciation of the beauty of three-dimensional space. That one on the right was acquired by the Kobe Lampworking Museum in Japan, so I was a big honor last year. This is one of the first ones that I started adding more and more layers to. I always started at the very center, going out slowly. Here's a couple others. That one on the right is on the table here. And then, excuse me, the one on the left also is at that museum in Japan. Well, also developing all these little micro techniques with the molecules and the lattices. I've been practicing scaling down my hollow work. So that on the right is the little tea set that's on the table here under ultraviolet light. The left is a project that I had when I was a student at Salem, where we had a design drone apparatus, where we had a kind of checklist of techniques and types of things that had to be in it, and it couldn't be bigger than 12 inches, and it was. And so I asked if there was a lower end size limit. My teacher kind of laughed and said, "What do you mean?" But no. So I made this teeny tiny little apparatus. One of my other proudest bodies of work in recent times are these vials, which are for whatever liquids the customers and consumers might want to put in them, and they almost all feature an LSD molecule. So these two are both celebrating Bicycle Day, which is the underground holiday celebrating Dr. Albert Hoffman, who was the inventor of LSD, the first time that he ever intentionally ate his own medicine. The first time a human being intentionally invented LSD, he wrote his bike book. And he's written lots about that bike ride, and that bike ride, I believe, catapulted a lot of human creativity and a lot of small ripples into society as we know it, even if not on the surface. So I try every year around Bicycle Day, which is April 19th, to make a vial that just packs even more detail and even more techniques and even more time into as small of a space as possible. There's a few more vials under ultraviolet light. I always try and incorporate as many black light details into my pieces as I can, sort of as a nod to chemistry and how a lot of these molecules, you can't see them until using some kind of spectroscopy to figure out what they are. One of the most common forms of that is using UV light. Plasma is also a body of work I've been really enjoying exploring, mostly with Bruce Suba again in Santa Cruz. So that piece on the right is that hollow DMT molecule that I made in Salem that was in that Christmas party slide. I eventually finished it, brought it back to California, and Bruce pumped it full of a whole mixture of noble gases. Plasma sculptures are essentially neon signs with a lot more interesting things going on. And this other piece here, I couldn't find a better picture of it to include, unfortunately, but it's an accurate DNA molecule in a small capsule. It's one of my favorite pieces. It is on the front of my business cards, which are also on the table. And the most recent development, I decided that they weren't small enough. This magnifying glass setup that I've been using for the last 9 years or so, I realized I had gotten kind of stagnant with it. Everybody was always like, ooh, they're so small, wow, look at that. And I was starting to realize, like, no, they could be smaller, though. I'm kind of bored with these. So I recently invested in a kind of dissecting microscope, a stereoscopic 7 to 90 times magnification microscope. I'm working with a scientific glass blower in Colorado who's helping me develop quartz glass torch tips that get down to even smaller precision than what's factory made. And this is the first successful little micro dopamine, and that's also on the table here. And that about wraps up the presentation. So thank you to Sonoran Glass School, my buddy Brian here, for inviting me out and curating the class and helping it go smooth. All of you that are here and everyone else that's had an impact on the journey. So now I have my micro station here. I'm going to put together a tiny little DMT molecule. And then I have some prep that I did ahead of time to turn that into the center of a small little goblet cup. So before I do that, I think I'm going to do a brief little tour of the work I have on the table. The molecule is sort of repetitive, so as I'm doing that, if you guys want to kind of filter in and cycle around and observe some of the work closer, you can. So I'll sort of tour around what's here. I have some of my pendants in this area here. Little molecules inside discs of different styles and shapes. This is that same uranium T-set that was in the slideshow. I have a few of my micro lattices and lattice-inspired sculptures. This little guy, which I am going to keep closed, unfortunately, because they'll blow away super easily or somebody bumps them. These are the two microscope molecules. There's a dopamine and a DMT in there. A couple more lattice sculptures, and this double Klein bottle was one of my demonstrations to the class. So I finished this up a couple days ago. Super grateful for all the students that were here, and I hope they all learned a lot of fun stuff. Another project from the class that just finished up this morning, actually, pulled out of the kiln about an hour ago, is this large decanter. It features a clear lattice sculpture inside that main orb, and it would sort of work as an aerator as well. If you poured wine in it with these 3 tubes, it would disperse it. This is an oxytocin molecule here, and this lattice sculpture, same one that was in Venice, sings. It's got a little extra feature. So kind of at your leisure, just be respectful of each other and everything. You can kind of cycle in and take a closer look. I'll be working on this molecule and then this goblet for the rest of the scheduled demo time too. So if you guys do have questions about the presentation, about me, about anything I'm doing, I can actually talk while I work pretty successfully. And without further ado, I'll switch over to the camera here so you guys can actually see what I'm doing, pass the mic off, and start doing it. So thank you all.
I don't know if you guys can see, but he has this little teeny tiny camera set up in front of his torch. So working so small, it'd be impossible for you guys to see, and that's going to get projected on the screen here. So the small scale will be blown up to a much larger size to be able to see and enjoy.
And I apologize, the camera is a little grainier than I would have wanted. I think the lighting in here is brighter than what I've done before, but I didn't be able to see my fingertips live. Pretty good. grab one of the like standard style chairs. Yeah, setting the flame can sometimes be one of the trickier parts of my whole process. I'm going to try and talk just with a loud voice as much as I can. Hopefully you can hear me towards the back. If anybody really can't hear, if there's an important question or anything, let me know. Brian can kind of hold the mic up. But I have my tiny flame set now. The propane oxygen torch. And then I take my tiny piece of glass that I've already stretched out from a bigger rod. And I'll start by just making all my little atoms. So I make a tiny little ball on the end of the rod. And I attach a dot to that. And then I grab that dot with a little piece of clear glass. Melt it off, and now I'm left with one little carbon atom with a spot that's going to later on be one bond. And now I'm going to do that about a dozen times. Ahead of time, I'll plan out each molecule I'm making and make little piles of my handles so that I'm able to kind of talk and keep communicating and keep in my flow without worrying about counting how many I'm making or anything else like that. So you can kind of see how it goes pretty quick, but it's also going to be pretty repetitive. So please don't hesitate to shout out any questions. I can't really look up and raise
Does anyone have any questions? I can walk around with the microphone. If you do at any point, just let me know. Yeah.
When you work on the microscope, do you like look like a titanium lens?
I do actually. I have an old pair of broken glasses that I kind of strap in with a rubber band right under the magnifier of the microscope. And so then that way I can see. So his question about using a titanium lens, these glasses I'm wearing have a special filter that eliminates the orange flare that kicks up off the glass. At this scale, there's not much of an orange flare, and I probably could see what I'm doing without them. But it's safer for your eyes to wear them, and it helps you see the flow of the glass as it gets hot inside. You'll see that sodium flare more when I step up to the bigger torch.
What size rod is that you're using?
The stringers that I pull are probably about 1/2 millimeter to 3/4 of a millimeter. And the clear glass that I'm grabbing it with is 1 millimeter.
And what coefficient?
It's all 33, it's borosilicate. I use a variety of different colors. Every one of these little dots I'm adding to my black one that's going to eventually become a bond is a color called Illuminati or Ion, which is a green UV reactive color. So that's how I make it so that each molecule will glow later on. There's a few other colors available to us in the borosilicate world that create a blue or yellow or pink or orange glow. The green with its uranium content is the brightest by far.
Why is it when the glass is hot, the black light doesn't work? Do you know that? When it cools down, it works?
Slightly. Somebody was just asking me about that recently. Yeah, when the glass is actually hot, right after we're working on something, it doesn't glow under the black light. I'm not 100% certain, but I believe it's because the glow that's emitted in the black light are electrons in the glass jumping an energy level and then dropping back down and emitting light. I believe when they're hot, they're already at the higher energy states, so they kind of ignore the black light. Don't quote me on that.
Do you have to worry about annealing at all at that scale?
At this scale, I don't, and I'll give you a small demo of how quick they cool off here.
Yeah.
So right now I'm pulling this off. I'm melting it back into a ball. It's molten. It's at least 2,000 degrees there, and then I'm holding it in my fingers. So because there's such small mass involved, they cool off so quick that I can just do that. That also helps me avoid using a kiln or an annealing oven, which a lot of glass workers have to use in order to avoid thermal shock. It's virtually impossible to get thermal shock or to crack the glass at this scale. It is very easy to accidentally crush a piece or lose a piece, so it's not invincible.
Have you ever tried any out of soft glass or quartz at this scale?
I haven't at this scale. It's something I really want to try. Scratch that, I have made a few out of found glass, some sea glass and little bottle scraps. Made those right when COVID hit in 2020. Could have been a whole slide up there, honestly. It's pretty impactful with my formation. I had the opportunity to join my brother and some of his close friends to quarantine in a small island community in Alaska for an undetermined amount of time as it seemed the world was falling apart. So I obviously brought my little torch because it's so portable. Luckily, society didn't crumble. I was able to go to the hardware store and buy my little oxygen tanks. But I was stuck with only my micro torch as my only glass outlet for about 2.5 months. So at some point during that, I found some sea glass and kind of chipped a little bit off, stretched out a little stringer, and made a couple little structures out of it. And it worked very similarly to the borosilicate, actually. I think at this scale, with the heat kind of both heating up and cooling down so quick, a lot of the coefficients of expansion properties just aren't as apparent and immediate.
This type of torch working, we usually have propane and oxygen tanks, much larger, K-tank size used for welding, and sometimes they'll last a couple days, and sometimes when you're going full blown, it runs out in about like 6 hours. So I'm curious how long your little tanks end up lasting you with that.
So I could probably work that same full-size K-tank he's talking about that a studio like this could easily blow through in half a day. If I worked on only this flame off of one of those, I would estimate it would last me about 2.5 years.
Very efficient.
There's been multiple times I've been at studios. I've now developed having my small little tanks, which are right under me here. I don't know if you can see, if everybody can see, but little disposable hardware tanks.
How long do those last?
These last me, I could blow through an oxygen tank using this type of flame in a week or two if I was working a lot, which is still impressive, but it is disposable. At home, I have a small medical size tank where it's the same kind of compressed gas, big steel cylinder as the larger ones for a real studio, except it's very small like you would see for somebody's medical oxygen system, and that will last me close to a year.
Wow.
That's what I kind of guess my like multiple year estimate for large tanks off of.
Who are your collectors, Dan?
So I have a variety of collectors. One thing that's been really cool to me is a lot of other glass artists like to collect my work. Usually I feel like some glass artists are super cool with trying to collect everybody else's art they can. But I've had a lot of some of my favorite glass blowers as soon as they see people try to buy a piece, which is really cool. Another one is the psychedelic community. Most of my molecules that I like to make, that I'm kind of passionate about spreading knowledge and awareness of, are psychedelic molecules. These tend to be chemicals that to people who love them, they really love them. They've really saved a lot of people's lives and left a strong impact on a lot of people. So a lot of people want their little keepsake of that structure. Now I'm done with all my little black boards. Those are going to be my carbon atoms. I always color code my molecules based on the standard CPK is the abbreviation for some reason, coloring scheme, in which black represents carbon atoms, blue represents nitrogen atoms, and white is hydrogen. Those are the only three that are going to be on this DMT molecule. In case people aren't familiar, and a little bit of like backdrop on what DMT is, and N-dimethyltryptamine is a simple tryptamine molecule. Tryptamine is kind of a skeleton of the molecule. Once I'm putting it together, I'll point out when I get to that tryptamine part, do a brief little chemistry naming lesson for y'all. It's commonly referred to as the spirit molecule or the God molecule. It's produced in the pineal gland or the third eye of most mammals. And it's released in very large amounts at birth and at death. So it's been linked to consciousness and reality as we know it through that. It can also be ingested exogenously through either smoking the isolated molecule or ingesting a brew like ayahuasca or yopo or a variety of other indigenous plant medicine rituals. And when ingested exogenously, many people report very similar, verifiable experiences with interacting with other intelligences. Some people theorize that it's opening up doors to the spirit world where you can communicate with spirits. Some people think it's just turning your conscious eye inward and you're communicating with different parts of your brain that you're not used to. One way or another, I think it's a pretty fascinating molecule that may or may not be crucial to daily reality as we know it. And it's a relatively simple psychedelic structurally. So it's kind of my go-to for trying out a new technique or doing a demonstration like this. Now, kind of forgot because we talked about molecules. Now I'm adding more dots to each of my atoms. So my little piles of atoms that I piled up, I separated based on the geometry that each one is going to have, based on the bonds it makes in the molecules. Going back to what I said about my initial kind of strike of inspiration of, wow, there's only a few shapes that make all this happen. This molecule has 8 sp2 hybridized carbon atoms, which each form 3 bonds in a perfect triangle. So this first pile of atoms that I'm preparing, I already have 1 dot from that first one I put on when I was making my handles. And now I'm adding 2 more for a total of 3.
Do you ever need a reference photo still, or do you just have it memorized?
Only on obscure molecules. I have pretty much all of the ones I regularly make and are passionate about. So serotonin, dopamine, psilocybin, THC, caffeine, DMT, LSD, mescaline. All these I have, I would say, memorized, but it's more so have a familiarity with the structure. I kind of know the basic core skeletons of them. And sometimes I'll maybe double check if I haven't made one in a while. I'll be like, oh, does this oxygen go here or there? And then if somebody commissions one, like I recently made a sucrose molecule for somebody. And I had to double check that one. I knew it was a sugar made up of carbon and oxygen, but I wasn't sure how they exactly linked together. Usually with my chemistry background, I can just look at a 2-dimensional skeletal structure you'll see where it's the hexagons and little angles and zigzags. Those provide all of the information I really need to translate to 3D. Every now and then, if it's a particularly funky structure, I'll have to actually look up and get a 3D model or even request one. One of my favorite things about my body of work and another kind of collector base is actual researchers and chemists. So So I recently made a couple molecules for a grad student to give to his professor of novel organic structures that they were working on in their labs. These molecules had never existed anywhere. I couldn't go look at the Wikipedia page for them or anything because they haven't existed yet. But that student was able to send me a 3D file that I could load into a molecule viewing program to be able to make sure I made it just right for him. Now this next little pile, there's only 4 of them in this pile, are tetrahedral geometry. sp3 hybridized carbons, which means that each little carbon is making a total of 4 bonds, which means I have to add 3 more. That also means that it becomes 3-dimensional. Unlike the other one where it's 3 making a triangle, this one is 4 which are evenly spaced from each other. So it's not just like 4 points of a compass, north, south, east, west. And once I finish these 4, then I just have to add a couple little dots to my blue nitrogen atoms. And then I start piecing them all together. Frequently when I'm doing my own work in my studio and at home, I have this little torch set up at home and then I have my bigger torch in a full-on studio. When I'm doing my micro work at home, based on whatever orders or ideas or commissions I have lined up, sometimes I'll do really large batches of molecules. Sometimes up to even 20 to 25 molecules in one batch. So rather than having a pile of 4 of these little guys to prepare, I'll have a pile of 162 of them. And that really just becomes this meditative flow where it's hard to enter into on command, but once I'm just sitting here for hours doing the exact same little thing, I'm sort of watching my fingertips do the work. And my 2 nitrogen atoms I'm doing, I just have to be careful that each one of these has a slightly different geometry as well. They each also make 3 bonds, but one of them follows the same pattern as the tetrahedral, and one of them follows the trilateral. Now I've got all those pieced together. I might just grab my water bottle behind me so I'm not sweating when I'm getting up. Now piecing them together is a much faster and fun process where I kind of push each one together the tiniest bit, make a connection, and then pop my handle off. Once the molecule's all done, I'll go through and stabilize the bonds by putting a little bit more heat, which allows that glass to shrink into a really nice little bar. Almost every organic molecule I make, somewhere in it has a 6-membered carbon ring, which on its own is benzene. When it's a part of something, it's called a phenyl ring. So I usually start with that. A fun part of making these two is that the more stable the molecule in reality, the easier it usually is for me to make. Molecules that don't want to exist in nature, that fall apart super easy, tend to have a lot of really weird angles or a lot of single kind of chains of atoms connected. And those become problematic for me because as I'm putting them together, if I attach a bit and I stretch it out and I maybe move it a little too much, then I run into the issue of maybe breaking it off around here or here. But little rings in molecules create stability. I have to do those little double seals to connect the ring all the way. I always kind of frequently adjust my little flame as I'm doing each little part, which frequently causes it to blow out because it's a small flame. I'll have to turn that back on every now and then. So now it's that benzene or phenol ring. And then in a tryptamine molecule, there's a small pentagon attached to that. There's a nitrogen atom in it, and that creates what's called an indole. This is kind of where like the question about if I have them all memorized, it's more so a familiarity. It would almost be like asking an architect if they have like a building memorized. It's like not so much, but they know that you have to do a scaffolding and then framing, all the different things. I kind of just have become really familiar with all the different parts of these molecules and how they interact and relate to each other.
So we're not going to get tested?
Nope, you're safe. I should have made a little test at the end, that'd be fun. This now is an indole ring. Now I'm going to start adding my tetrahedral carbons coming off of it.
Dan did say all the students this week got A pluses.
Yeah, they all did. You guys did great. A++ actually. And I was really stoked to see a few of the students really even spent quite a lot of time on my little micro setup here that made available for them, but wasn't really anticipating many people would take me up on. So it was really cool to see their reactions to trying to work with glass on such a small scale. Now I'm adding this nitrogen to here. Now it has become a tryptamine molecule. A tryptamine is the indole ring with 2 carbons and a nitrogen. Any compound with this nitrogen added becomes an amine also, so keep that in mind for the next couple parts. A single carbon with the 3 little hydrogens on it, which I'll add at the end, is called a methyl group. So I have tryptamine here. And now I just added a methyl group to it, so I have methyltryptamine. And I added it to the nitrogen, so it's N-methyltryptamine. Then I add this second methyl group. Now I have dimethyltryptamine. They're both added to the nitrogen, so it's N-N-dimethyltryptamine. And now my molecules put together. A lot of times that one went together pretty darn smooth. Got my flame going out a few times, but that'll happen. But if there's anything I want to adjust, I do it at this point, and I can do that just by putting the tiniest bit of heat into the tiny connection.
You ever broken one sneezing when you're working?
I used to all the time, actually. Not so much breaking them, but blowing out my torch. Sneezing, laughing, talking. That was during the short period when I was at almost this size scale, but before I got a magnifying glass. So you can imagine without the magnification, I was like, they were trying to see it, and there was nothing between me and the flame. If this magnifying glass wasn't here, even just like projecting my voice like I did, it would blow out my flame for sure. So now I'm kind of drawing one of my clear pieces of glass 3-dimensionally by keeping my heat on the very end and slowly moving it. This creates a bridge, we call it flame working, which is a really common technique for keeping something in place while I'm working on it. I'm going to go through and stabilize each of the bonds. And I think you could pretty easily imagine, even if you don't have class experience, that if that bridge wasn't here, and I heat it up right here, this part's just going to flop on the So now that I have it all secured, I'm actually going to turn my plane up a little bit. And now I'm going to go back and just every connection I made, I'm just going to kind of tap with heat. When glass gets hot, it pulls in on itself due to the surface tension. So because all of my little parts are now held in place by that bridge, if I'm quick and direct and careful with my heating, each of those little bonds just pulls into a really nice, straight little connection between the two atoms. Did I get a time check from anybody? Worked pretty well timing, I believe.
If you made a mistake, like somewhere in the middle at this point, would it be hard to go back in and try to fix one of those in between sections?
It could be, definitely.
Yeah.
Mistakes at this scale are kind of interesting because it's such a kind of stepwise process, and I've become so comfortable with this scale. It goes back to kind of the microscope molecules and the concept of feeling stagnant with this. Like, I acknowledge this is pretty small and it really doesn't need to be smaller, but right now I could like do this practically with my eyes closed. I've been working at this scale for 9 years now about, and it feels really big to me. Like, oh, I have so much time to do each little move and I can push them around. And, wow, there's so much space between them. On the microscope, this step I just did right there, kind of melting everything in again, was where I have the most failures. There'll be a fraction of a second, my flame, instead of going right here, it'll go right there, and then boom, I lost the whole molecule. So that's been a frustrating but exciting challenge. I said I have 2 of them here. Those were the only 2 I've successfully pulled off. I've tried probably a dozen of them now. I technically had a 3rd one that worked, but when I was in the very, very final stages of it, I put a little bit too much tension while I had 2 pieces attached, and it flung off of my handle, bounced somewhere, and despite almost an hour of scouring the ground around my desk, searching with my little black light even, I had to accept it's gone.
White is that?
I'm not 100% sure. I tend to use Star White. I have gotten some stringers just mixed up over the years though. And it's kind of interesting, I've noticed at this scale, the colors in color chemistry, a lot of colors in borosilicate glass, especially cadmium colors, the bright reds, oranges, and yellows, they can be really finicky to work on a big scale. They'll boil out where some of the chemicals causing the color will sublimate out of the glass. You end up with a fizzy, gross white scuzz on it. And at this scale, they'll still kind of bubble a tiny bit, but they rarely build up that scuzz to the point where you can actually see it. So I try not to rely on getting away with things, but at this scale, there are some things that I can let slide that I might not if it was a very large desktop model. So now I've got my molecule pretty much finished. I've got my little white hydrogen atoms all around it. Hydrogen always only makes 1 bond, so I'm able to use it as sort of an end cap rather than preparing separate little atoms of hydrogen like I did on my carbons and my nitrogens. I can just go around and add little dots, which helps things go pretty fast. So now what I'm doing here is adding 3 posts on the back of the molecule. If you guys look closely at that pendant that was passed around, you would notice that the molecule inside was connected to the hollow disc by these 3 posts. These are pretty important to make sure they're pretty well attached to the molecule, to make sure they're about the same length. And and to make sure they're spread out just enough where it can sit on all three like a tripod. And I just remembered that this little disc I have ready for the goblet is a little bit thicker than my pendants that I normally do. So right there, I went with kind of my muscle memory and my normal length of these pegs. I'm going to extend them a tiny bit to account for what this piece is going to go to. As I've been telling my students last couple days, all these tiny little details, like right here, that's probably 1.5 millimeters of length I'm adding to each of these. And I'm sure I could have not done that and it would be just fine, but all these super OCD little details end up making a much cleaner and more quality piece. So now I'll just attach a little handle, and all that's left is taking off that bridge that I added, putting my last little hydrogens on, and then I'll be done with the micro portion of the demo. If anybody has any super micro relevant questions, now would probably be a good time to ask them before we shift gears to the big torch.
How long would it take you to go through a pound of glass working at this scale?
Ooh, if I really tried to burn through a whole pound of glass, probably like a year. maybe 2.
What sort of vent are you using for your home setup?
I actually don't use any at this scale. I'm confident that it's such a small enough flame and small enough bits of glass that are getting hot. And I'm not really working like 14-hour marathon sessions at home these days. If I were to do that, so that was a little mishap there. I'll use it as a teaching moment. I noticed with my OCD that this little bond didn't look quite as clean as the other ones. So I went to heat it up. Because I still had a bigger flame for making these posts, when I heated it up, that whole arm started to move. So I'm just going to heat it up again and leave it there. Be really careful about doing that really slowly so I don't lose my shape I need. Double check my pegs still look pretty good, and we're good. So I'll turn off the OCD there. But yeah, I do always, like, if I am working longer than an hour or 2 at home, I'll make sure windows are cracked and everything.
I was going to ask that.
And I kind of proved that was safe when I was living in my van. I had built out a little workbench in my van so I could make molecules wherever I was traveling. And I did, because I also cooked in there and everything, had a small carbon monoxide alarm. So that never once went off while I was working. There is our DMT molecule. Okay. So now we're going to shift gears a tiny bit, and I'm going to hop up to this huge torch here, which is one of the smallest possible bench torches that's in existence. The GTT Lynx. It uses propane and oxygen. I'm going to kind of tune you guys out for a quick second, just assemble what I need to get ready over here. Definitely feel free to ask questions if you guys want to start cycling in and looking at the work a little closer. It would be a pretty good time to do that. Shift this out to my little title page.
So yeah, Dan is going to be working on this GDT Lynx torch. We have a wide variety of burners we use in the torch shop. There's all these different brands. We have a Nortel Red Maxes over here. Today, in this class, we have a capacity for 6 students. We had 5 students during the week. I have a teaching bench, and then we have a spot for 6 potential students. We do classes every Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. We do make your owns that are 30 minutes. It's like a guided instruction where we make a piece together. We have up to 7 different options now. That's kind of to get your feet wet, get your get your start with class. And if you decide you like working in, we have fundamentals classes that start at intro to beginner, intermediate, afterwards at advanced. So just something we'd like to get started with. We have a shop here for that. And we also do have these same little mini torches that you are working. Not quite as small as that, but a small scale. So if anybody's interested in working glass, please come and see me.
So I forgot to kind of show it on the camera before I turned it off, but this is a lattice I've been working on for the last couple months now. It's tetrahedral geometry off and on, obviously.
Wow. Look closer.
So this one has tetrahedral geometry, which is a little harder for me to wrap my brain around. It's one of the first I've done this many on. I'll leave it over by the other pieces. The other lattices on the table are all octahedral geometry, which are kind of more straightforward checkerboard.
And you should get a video with the black tablecloth as the background as well. Really good.
When you're looking at the pieces closer, feel free to pick up and look at the pendants, but mostly everything else, please don't touch. You can lean in and blow on this. Just flame work, yeah. So everything on the table was made on a very similar torch to this. Using the exact same process I'm about to demonstrate.
Also, I wanted to mention it's the first time at Glass School. Welcome. So if you need water, we do have a water fountain over here behind the red table, and our restroom is behind that white wall over there.
It's not his table.
Yeah.
Makes my neck hurt to watch it.
I know, I was thinking that I could never.
You have a good chiropractor? I should.
That's amazing.
But those big toads that are around Tucson, those the big poisonous ones, the poison that is deep. Yeah. It's like poisonous to dogs, but if it happens to them. No. Yeah, I know
Alrighty, just about done with my little shuffle here. I'll grab the mic and do a little show what I'm about to do, and then I'll just kind of do it. I'll be able to still answer questions as I'm working on this, but I want to briefly show what I'm about to do. So I have this already, I have a simple cup already prepared. I have those similar to my pendants already prepared. A lot of you are probably more familiar with either soft glass or no glass out here. So with borosilicate, I can be pretty aggressive with letting things cool and reheat carefully to only one part. So I'm not going to have these preheated in an oven or anything. I'm going to use a kind of larger flame you'll see that warms it up slowly. My first step is going to be opening this disc, dropping my molecule in and sealing it inside, and then attaching that to my foot, and then taking my cup and sticking that right on top. So hopefully it all goes well, hopefully it goes pretty quick and you can see it all. I should be finished up right around 7. I'll keep going, you guys are very welcome, I believe, right, to stay till the thing is done. If you have to go somewhere right at 7, I totally understand. And like I said, while I'm working, feel free to check out the work. Now that I have this torch on, don't come around anymore, but definitely kind of filter in there. And I'll still be able to answer questions. Like I said, it's going to get a tiny bit louder, and I'll have my hands a little more full, but here we go.
No, you're good.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. There is a very small chance that like a piece of glass could break and fall and roll or anything. If anything like that does happen, fight your instinct. Just go, oh, I'll help and pick it up. It's probably going to be hot or sharp.
Pick your feet up.
Floor burns.
Right?
Yeah.
This,
It's going to take a while to get the propane through all those, so kind of just crank it for a minute.
so when we first set up a torch, I did my classes in this other studio room right here. You should definitely pop your head in and look at. So when we set up the torch over here, the gas line gets full of air. You just take a little bit to turn on.
Pressure's and everything good.
So,
Maybe on the post or upside down.
so everything fundamentally is the exact same as what I was just doing on the tiny little torch where I'm getting pieces of glass hot and I'm sticking them together while they're hot to make one new piece of glass. There's going to be a lot of weird little technical moves and things I'm doing. I'm not going to explain every single one of them. Just trust that every little thing I do has some kind of a reason. And I'm not really trying to answer super duper duper technical questions right now during this demo. For any flame workers that are here, pick my brain afterward for sure. But if you have any questions about the general flow of what I'm doing, and like, oh wait, why did you do that first?
I'll try to narrate a little bit too for you.
Perfect, that would be appreciated.
That flame he's using right there, we call it an annealing flame. It's basically like a pre-warming flame. So it's really bright, but it's around like 900 to 1100 degrees. The kiln we end up putting the glass in.
There's like a strong cross breeze. Is that manageable at all, or is that it'll be okay if it's not manageable? But I've done a lot of demos outside, so it's okay if you can't turn it off when you some wind. But yeah, massively, thank you. I always can't help myself narrating little technical things too, so I'll probably ramble a bunch of jargon that some of you might not be familiar with. I have a tiny little hole popped on the side of this disc, so it's not actually closed off. You have to be really careful with glass blowing about making a closed off disc. You don't want it to be closed off, because then it'll expand or it'll contract. Right, close that mic. The handful of tools that are really essential for us, a lot of the time we'll use glass as a tool, like I was just doing when I was opening that. But also, we'll frequently need to use graphite to push the glass around, or metal tweezers, or holders of varying kinds. So now that I've got this open, I'm going to grab my little DMT molecule we just made, and I'm just going to drop it right in there.
Are you putting it with the little feet down?
Yeah, I am. So usually when I drop them in, they kind of fall on their side, and then I have to move around until I pick them up just right. I'm looking around at my piece to remind myself where my little pinhole was and what orientation I want my molecule. For technical reasons that will make sense maybe to some glass blowers. Now I've got it centered and oriented exactly where I want it. So I'm going to connect it through the backside of the glass. With those little molecules, you can see even this very small flame right there significantly bigger than the one I made the molecule on. If I reach inside that little disc with this flame for more than half a second, I would come out with a little black, white, blue ball of glass instead of a molecule. So I'm just tapping each of my little 3 posts to make sure they're sealed in place. And then I'm going back in with a little more heat to make sure they're actually fused. So similar to what I, like a furnace worker, maybe Brian can narrate a little bit as I do this next little part about like the space I'm standing in right here, in case some of you aren't familiar with what a hot shop is. But similar to how a furnace worker would constantly be reheating their piece, I'm kind of constantly going back to this flame to keep it all warm so I don't deal with any cracks.
Yeah, that flame he was using, as I mentioned earlier, that one's around like 900 to 1100 degrees. So when we finish our piece, we put it in the oven. It's at 1050 degrees. That's our end temperature. So at that temperature, the molecules are getting hot. They're getting excited. It's kind of like a jacuzzi for the glass, is how I like to explain it. And it's getting rid of the stress that accumulated during making the glass. And then depending on the thickness of the glass, we leave it in the kiln for like 15 minutes, sometimes all day at that temperature. Then ideally we cool it down at about 100 to 200 degrees an hour. And you're going to mention thermal shock, and that's something we're really cognizant of as a glass artist. In the hot shop, they're much more worried about thermal shock with soft glass. Where we're working with Pyrex with borosilicate glass, like your cookware at your home, you can go into the oven, you can put boiling liquids in it, so it can hold up to the temperature fluctuations. You saw he had that at room temperature, he put on that bright flame and heated it up and didn't want to crack or anything like that. It's much harder to get away with that.
As I'm pulling off this glass, I'm ending up with a big mass of kind of just a glob on the end of my other rod. It's like under my left hand on that corner. I think I'm really only going to get to this step and then I'll just put it on the floor. So as I'm kind of cleaning up my glass here, so there's some little bits that fly off, and that's okay. I'm using a little water bucket to create that thermal shock that we usually try to avoid. And I can clean up the end of my rod that way.
A little bit more about this glass. If you look behind Dan, we see that red glow coming out. That's our soft glass furnace. So in there's a 300-pound crucible full of molten glass. It's at 2100 degrees. So when you're working soft glass, you go into the furnace with a stainless steel pipe and you're actually gathering the glass on the end of the stainless steel like honey. Our glass comes in rod and tubing form. So behind this wall here, we have rod and tubing. It's actually for sale to the public, so if you get into torch working and you get a shop set up, or if you are a local artist that needs color or needs clear, we have it available for sale here. And yeah, get back to Dan here on this little demo.
Yeah, so now, I know you guys can't really see it from over there, but I now have a nice, flat, clear window on the front of that disc instead of that small vase cup shape. And my molecule's mounted right in the middle. I'll look at it and make sure it's right where I want it to be, and it is. Now I'm going to move this guy out of my way. Now I'm taking off my handle that I had created before. I'm going to set it up to attach to my little foot so we can make my little cup. In a traditional goblet makers here, I'm gonna have to apologize that my foot is much bigger than the cup on top is gonna be. Kind of funky proportions, but we're going with what we got. One of my favorite parts about flame working specifically is that you can kind of take your time with things and make things in parts. So if I was making this cup at home and I ran into that little issue I just mentioned of like, oh shoot, this cup seems a little small, instead of going right away with it, I can just set it aside, maybe make a smaller foot to match that one, and then make a bigger cup to match my foot. So I really like flame working, borosilicate. It allows for a lot of like patience and adjustment with your process. I also love soft glass and hot chop. I haven't done too much of it, but when I was at Salem, I did get to try it out for a couple classes. I just think every form of glass, fusing, hot chop, castings, all fascinating.
I'm a little biased as a flame worker too. I've done a little bit of hot shot stuff and I've done some fusing stuff, but I've been flame working glass for 16 years. I like to tell people it's kind of like ceramics, it's like welding, it's like soldering, painting, drawing, everything kind of like in one art form. We get to work with bright colors. It's a really satisfying medium to get started in.
So now I've got my little molecule in my little disc, and I have it oriented with the little handle on the top of it. So now I'm going to start heating up my foot that I made.
Dan is really confident from his scientific background just to go in on full glass, and his understanding of the material, how much heat the flame is putting off, and his hand positioning is like super critical right now. If he had the wrong flame and if he went in too hot, that foot would want to fracture. Ideally, not that won't happen. Into a bunch of pieces. So this is like very complicated just to heat stuff up from room temperature. And he has a really like insane grasp of the material to be able to work the glass in this manner. Usually we have pieces in the kiln at 1,000 degrees. Keeping them warm in that operating temperature so that when you come out, we're not going to have any thermal shock issues. But he's just done it so many times, understands the material so well, you can get away with things that a lot of people say you can't even do.
I also wanted to show you guys something a little cooler, so I did these little spirals on it. Those kind of add complication because now I can't really see exactly how thick the glass is right there. And anytime you're working with colored glass and kind of different types of glass, it introduces just more potential variables. But I didn't want to just do a more easier cut for y'all. So I'm going to set my disc down for a second. This pad I'm using, I'll plug the Buddy's company really quick. It goes by Heady Savers. Really cool thing for any flame workers to look into. It's a mat that's made of that plumbing mat material, so you shouldn't blast it with a torch, but it's very heat resistant. You can set down hot glass on it. I almost always have one in front of my torch in case my piece falls or anything. Now I've cleaned up that piece of clear that was on there, was left over from when I first shaped my foot. I had it on a long clear handle, and I spun it pretty aggressively to get that shape to create. So now I'm just putting a lot of heat into my bigger solid part and just enough heat into my thinner disc. And then we're just going to go ahead and see if we don't get a good clean connection on them. So now I have a foot with a little DMT molecule in the disc. It could just be a display piece like that as is, but we're going to keep going with it. I'm going to melt that connection in a little bit more. Make sure it's all nice and happy. I like using the term happy with my glass a lot. It just really, similar to what Brian said about the kiln annealing being the jacuzzi for your glass. I really like to make sure my glass is happy as I'm working on it. If I see a part where there's a weird fold or something that's going to make the glass unhappy, I'll get rid of it right away.
That's something interesting about borosilicate glass too. So we talked about it being happier with thermal expansion, but what it doesn't like, we call acute angle. So if you do a weld and there's a little bit of an undercut, if there's not a completely smooth transition between your two joints, that could be a spot that as it heats up and cools down, it want to fracture. So he did that weld, you get them really hot. Now he's going with that little micro torch. If you think of it like a valley, he's kind of heating both the peaks of the weld until that valley has a nice smooth flow in between it. If we have any sharp angles there, it could be an issue as it's heating up and cooling down. So luckily we have these super hot little torches to get in there and relieve that.
Yeah, this kind of work is kind of what these torches were designed and intended for. And then as I was in that process of scaling down my molecule process, I went, what if I just use one of these as my main torch? Sometimes with certain seals we do, we can just pop it right off like that without having to fully melt the glass apart.
That's kind of a similar move in both shops. In the hot shop, they have a sculptural punty, which is a hot punty they leave on, and then they cold work it off in the kiln. More likely, we have a cold seal, and that's kind of like the final move in the hot shop. You go over and you break your handle off. The final move, you're purposely cracking it off, and you prepare that weld that it's going to fracture right where you want. So sometimes we have a handle, or we have a cold seal, what we call it in the flame shop, and you actually break it off there. It's like an easy way to get rid of the handle.
And this will be a very fun direct example of borosilicate, how you can get part of it super hot right next to a part that's room temperature. I put on this Kevlar glove just in case my flame kind of licks up a little bit. I don't want to zap my finger. And on the cup about this size, this warming in process, it might get a little bit warm to hold up towards the very top. But I'm comfortable and confident enough to just hold this without having to worry about dealing with two grabbers or anything. Right, you toss the graphite pad right here. So again, it's not that the glass I'm holding is hot. If you saw that, I just grabbed it with my non-glove hand to get it back into my glove. But it's more a precautionary, just in case glove.
I mentioned that annealing flames around 900 to 1100 degrees. When we have the pure oxygen in the flame, you have that blue lightsaber kind of laser beam type flame. That flame is upwards of 4,000 degrees, so very, very hot flame.
Ooh.
What temperature does borosilicate glass melt at?
When we're pulling borosilicate out of the furnace, it's 2,350 degrees. It starts to get a little like liquidy, malleable around 11, 1200.
So it looks like you got that stick nice and on center, which is a very difficult thing to do. You want this goblet to be sitting straight and be nice and on axis, we call it. And then as he's going to go, he's going to heat this up again just to get a little heat there, and then he's going to mini torch it to get that weld diffuse on. But if you mini torches it too much, that goblet top's going to start moving around. So he's going to be very careful. He's probably going to use a quartering technique. So we think about that weld in 4 quadrants. We have the top, the bottom, the left, and the right. And what we do is we work one of the 3 quadrants at a time. So if you work the right side, the top, bottom, and left are still relatively cool and they provide stability. You get that right side worked in. Then you let that right side cool down, and you either go to the other side of the quadrant. So we usually work welds in when there's no bridge to hold it in like a 4-point weld, we call it. So we got that one quadrant, now he's going in on the other quadrant. I Ideally, sometimes when you stick these, it's a perfect 1-point weld where you don't even have to go in with the mini torch. But likely, a lot of the times when that happens, you still want to go in just to be extra sure. You don't want to be arrogant and overpass one little step and put all this effort into a piece. So we always like to be extra sure and go in and make sure we can get it as good a quality weld as we can. And also, if someone wants to buy this, we can assure them that we made it as strong as we possibly can, instead of skipping a step just to try to finish it quicker. If you're interested in making your own drinking ware, we are going to be doing a shot glass class here next month, I believe. So if you have no experience, we're offering up to 6 students. You come into the flame shop here, we do a 3-hour class, you get to come up with a very own shot glass. Goblet class is more of an advanced class, so we can work towards that as well if you're interested.
Right here, I was doing tiny adjustments because when I went in on that fourth corner that Brian so well described, I did get a little hot and I felt it kind of starting to drip. That goes back to that OCD of doing tiny little adjustments to get just the right effect. And I think Brian mentioned earlier that I have some weird approaches to do things that some people wouldn't think is possible. And this is one of the main ones of those. I have my little disc with my little molecule in it, with my little pinhole in it. And now that I'm done with all the heat around it, I'm actually going to close that off entirely.
So he's like hermetically sealing that molecule in there. There's a tiny little hole on that disc, and now he's taught this in the class. He's getting just the perfect amount of heat in that disc. If it's room temperature and he goes to heat it up, there's going to be a vacuum and it's going to suck in. If the disc is too hot and he goes to heat it up, it's going to expand and it's going to blow out. But he gets just a perfect amount of heat in there, and then with a little touch from the mini torch, he just closes off that hole, and that whole disc is now a closed off system. Which ideally with class, we don't want to do that. But like my whole career, I'm like, oh, I don't think you're supposed to do that. How do you get away with that? And this week I learned, like, oh, you can do it when you understand exactly the heat pressures that are going on. And I believe just like that, he closed it off.
Is that it?
That's about it.